You're listening to Interzone Pod with me, Gareth Jelley, the editor of Interzone. Find out more about Interzone at interzone.press, read stories for free at interzone.digital, and support Interzone at interzone.press/Patreon. Joining me on the show today is author Chris Farnell. Hello, Chris. Thanks so much for coming on the show and talking to me. I've spoken to you in the past before I was editing Interzone, but this is the first time you're kind of coming on Interzone Pod.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. And Interzone in particular is a real bucket list item. I remember picking up copies of it in the campus Waterstones 20 years ago. So it's really nice to be here.
And that was the which campus was that?
That was at UEA. They used to have a sort of little magazine stack in the Waterstones with a bunch of magazines, and there was always a copy of Interzone in there.
Mm-hmm. Just to sort of start things off, could you tell listeners a little bit about yourself, about who is Chris?
Yeah, my name's Chris Farnell. I've been writing for 20 years now. My first book was a young adult novel called Mark II about a kid whose parents clone his dead best friend. And then I've been freelancing and writing in various spaces for tabletop RPGs. Most recently, I did the Star Trek Lower Decks crew handbook. And my sort of big thing that I've got out at the moment is the Fermi's Progress and Fermi's Wake stories, which are about a prototype faster-than-light spaceship that blows up every planet it visits.
Yeah, it's a fascinating premise, and we'll come back to that in a second. Your first book was Mark II, and I'm wondering, kind of, do you remember when you first got interested in science fiction, either through print or through sort of TV shows?
Oh, always. I remember. I remember going to a sort of an open day at what would have been my primary school. So I must have been about 4 years old, and I was dinosaur mad already by that point. And the head teacher handed me a picture book about a time machine and someone going back and seeing dinosaurs. And that just... I have no idea what the book was called. I never found it again, but it just irreparably changed my brain ever since. And yeah, everything science fiction I've just devoured for, I think, coming on 35 or 6 years now.
Mm-hmm. And that knowledge, that kind of knowledge you have, you see it in the articles you write, because you've written for Den of Geek, you've written for Rock Paper Shotgun, you wrote for Interzone Digital about Blake 7,
Yeah.
and all sorts of sort of kind of frequently very funny sort of writing on sort of genre in different forms. When did you first think about becoming a writer, either a writer of articles or a writer of fiction?
I think there's a very natural progression from just playing Let's Pretend as a kid and just, imagining and playing with all the ideas you get, steal from all the various sci-fi media I was consuming as a kid. I think there's a very natural path from that into writing the stories down. And so I can't really pinpoint a sort of first time I started doing it, but I was writing things that were at least aiming for book length by around 12 and just, never stopped.
And Mark II was sort of traditionally published, and you were in your early 20s. How did that? What was the sort of the journey to that getting published?
It was about as traditional publishing journey as you could hope for, really. It was everything that I was told publishing should be. I wrote it, I drafted it to hell and back, I sent it to every slush pile I could get an address for, and then one day an agent picked it up. They sent it around. I got lots more. Still got a massive folder full of the rejection letters I picked up for that one. And then eventually Tyndall Street Press picked it up.
Was it marketed at the time as mainstream, or was it marketed as what would now be sort of young adult, or what?
Tyndall Street, they were still quite a sort of small independent press, and I think Mark II was their attempt at trying to move sideways into the kind of young adult space. So I think that's how they marketed it. I'm not sure if they found that to be as successful as they would have liked it to be. But yeah, it was very much sort of trying to slot into that young adult market, which was, huge back then.
Your newest books are the Star Trek Lower Decks book, which you mentioned, and which is a huge amount of fun, and also the latest season of the Fermi novellas. There's obviously a kind of there's a kind of link between Star Trek and the Fermi books, in the sense that you have episodic new worlds, although they obviously deal with those in very different ways. Yeah, could you tell listeners a little about those two books, about your kind of your love or your interest in Star Trek, and also how you hit on the idea of this spaceship that destroys entire sort of star systems every time it visits and leaves?
Well, yeah, there's a very direct line between the two, really, because I started writing it, would have been around 2015, when we were in the middle of this massive lull between, Enterprise had finished over a decade ago, Discovery wasn't out yet, even like Stargate had recently wrapped up. There was just no actual spaceships on TV around that time, I think. And there was a bit of sort of TV was very much in a sort of long arc-based kind of mood at the time. And what I really missed was those sort of Star Trek episodic storytelling formats. When you look at Star Trek, the original series, it's basically anthological storytelling, like the Twilight Zone, but you have these 5 characters who turn up in each story. And that is what I wanted to get at. But obviously, as Star Trek goes on, you keep on adding more continuity, you keep on adding, the Klingon Empire, you start creating a galaxy you can draw a map of. And I wanted a way of writing the story without getting bogged down in that. And in the original series, Kirk will come to a planet, have an adventure, then fly off. And the planet might as well have just been blown up by the engines that flew away. So I decided to do that. And just have that literally happen. Have a ship that introduces a new planet each story. That planet is the star of the story. That's what you're here to explore. And then when the story's done, you just wipe the board clean again. That's gone. You don't deal with that again.
And once you hit on that spark, you then obviously, anytime you have a show or a series with a starship, you have a starship crew. So how did you? What was your kind of thought process working through? Well, how am I going to write about a crew that kind of knows this is going on, that is sort of very much sort of aware of this? Like, what was it a case of? You had a couple of characters in mind, and then you built around that, or or did you kind of sort of plan out that you wanted to have different sort of, different character types, and you wanted to have a kind of balanced crew, and you sort of went about filling those slots?
Well, it's sort of evolved, but the where I started was I wanted to have a crew that was a toolbox that would allow me to pick apart various different sci-fi stories and ideas. So you need your sort of person who can do the science exposition, your person who can do the sort of squelchier science exposition. You need your action guy. You need your sort of viewpoint character. And also, because it's a present day set story, if you're doing space travel, you basically need an arsehole billionaire in there anyway. So that is one way that the crew got assembled from a sort of functional point of view. But also, looking again at Star Trek, the thing that makes that original series work is you think you've got an ensemble, but what you've actually got is one character, which is this constant ongoing argument between Kirk, McCoy, and Spock. They're each making up a certain viewpoint, logic, intuition, and the sort of pragmatic middle ground that Kirk makes up between it. And so I wanted the characters to be able to fit together in that way. So Elizabeth Gordon is very much there as just the most ruthlessly pragmatic person you could possibly imagine. Samson is very much this sort of vintage classical hero idea that doesn't work in this situation at all. Rujita is there because you need someone, given how grim the situation is, you need someone who can actually enjoy it and think that it is amazing to just be out in space. And Naomi's there because somebody needs to actually have a vague sense of actual ethics. And Connor is there to, again, be pretty much an eye guy, a sort of unremarkable person who is there in this situation and trying to respond to it in a way the audience might. But as I've written the stories and figured out for myself more about what Fermi is about and what it's doing, I've realised the other function they're all performing is just showing off really terrible human traits in different ways. Again, Gordon the billionaire needs no explanation. Samson is every white savior, colonialist, jingoistic idea that we've ever thought was good. Rujita is the very definition of you were so obsessed with whether you could, you didn't think about whether you should. Connor thinks that because he is apathetic and doesn't want to be involved in any of it, that somehow means he's not complicit and responsible for it. And even Naomi, who is there as a sort of moral compass of the whole deal, still has this idea that it is possible to improve things while working with and inside completely broken and damaging systems. And so each of them has an MO that in some way just keeps making things worse.
Mm-hmm. Did that emerge sort of through, you're writing these stories, you're thinking about how to put the characters into different situations, and then did you find these sort of insights coming quite sort of spontaneously, just sort of like, because as you got to know them better, they they would behave in a particular way. You kind of knew where they were going to go, or did you have to or was it kind of more difficult sometimes to get the characters into some of those situations?
And it sort of evolved from the stories as they were being written, and part of it is when you're writing, it can sometimes feel like there is a part of your brain that knows what it's doing and is just doing its thing and only really letting you in on the trick later. But like I said, I started writing these stories in 2015. Then 2016 happened and everything in there. The first set of stories was coming out immediately in the aftermath of our first round of lockdowns and COVID. And so as I was getting to finalising these stories and starting work on FERMI'S Wake, I did sort of have something click into place and realise, okay, I'm writing a story about people who are trapped in this machine that just does murder and killing planets. And the characters have no choice but to maintain this machine to survive. And looking around at life in capitalism in 2020, you can sort of see where the idea comes from.
Right. And it kind of must have taken on a very different sort of a very different kind of sort of tonality, or it must have started to mean something very different to you, as you say, living through the lockdown and living through sort of the last couple of years. That is, I can see that. And with FERMI'S, I mean, when it came to writing FERMI'S Wake, did what was going on in the world kind of help you to figure out where you were taking the story? Because I might be wrong, but I feel like you told me when I spoke to you before, and this is a while ago now, so I might be misremembering, but I feel like you told me that you didn't really have a sort of an end game in mind for the series. You were kind of writing it episodically, or like is that right or not?
There's always been a vague destination in mind, and it's been getting clearer as I've written. But I think by the time writing FERMI'S Wake was strange because I'd never really done a sequel before. And a lot of the time, I feel when you're writing things, you only realise what you were writing about after you've written it. So it was all coming into a story where you actually understand what the underlying engine is before you start. And a lot of the ideas were plot ideas that I had sort of brainstormed years ago, including the premise of D and Deception, which is the characters spend the entire story sitting in the kitchen playing a tabletop RPG together. And that was an old idea, but I was writing it in 2021, and I've not missed the fact that my series about exploring the biggest, wildest alien planets you can think of. When I started writing it in 2021, my first story was about all these characters being trapped in a room, imagining how nice it would be to work in an office and go to the pub.
Right. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. With FERMI'S Wake is the second season, which is sort of we can talk about it as a sort of novel of novellas, or we can talk about it as a season. And FERMI'S Progress is the first. But when you're writing them, how are you kind of juggling that? You know, this is a novella which is standalone, as you talk about. You know, with the sort of Star Trek idea or the episodic idea. And this is also part of a novel, and then this is also part of a kind of a three novel or multi novella arc. How in terms of sort of in terms of like thinking about readers coming in midway, or thinking about kind of how they're going to be sort of consumed, if that's the consumed by people. Are you worried about that, or are you kind of like thinking a lot about, I need to make this one, I need to add something here to make it make sense, basically? Or are you kind of working on the assumption that most people are going to go and read season 1, season 2 sequentially?
I think most people are probably going to start from the beginning. I don't know of anyone who I've talked to who has picked it up midway yet. I think partly it's a product of this being an independently published series, but I'm very keen to make sure that if someone pays money for any part of Fermi, that they will get a complete story for what they pay for. So if you pick up any one of the novellas, that is a story that you have bought. If you buy FERMI'S Wake or FERMI'S Progress, by the time you get from the beginning to the end of that 4-novella sequence, that will be a complete story that you've read. So I'm hoping that there isn't anything where you get that sense of having read a story that is entirely about leading up to a cliffhanger, or something that is entirely hints and clues for a story that you haven't finished yet.
A lot of love has clearly gone into the titles of these novellas, can you talk a little bit about how quickly these titles came to you? Like, were they there kind of as you were writing, or did you have to kind of brainstorm a few different options for some of them? And also, there's one novella left, I think, in this middle arc, FERMI'S Wake. Can you hint at all about that, about what readers can expect?
Yeah, a lot of the time the titles come really, really quickly, because if I have an idea, the first thing my brain does is start reaching about for a pun. So D and Deception was one that came really quickly, just because I like the layers to it, in terms of it's pointing to it being a tabletop RPG. It has that deception in it. And if you've read the book, you might, I don't know if anyone's actually got that joke yet, but there is a third layer of pun to that as well. So the jokes and the titles, they come pretty quickly together. The next one that is coming out, which, depending on when you're listening to this, might be about to be announced or has been announced a little while ago. The title isn't actually a pun. It's the phrase overview effect, which is the experience of going into space and seeing Earth from space from the first time, and that sense of perspective and how that changes your view on the world. But how that comes across through the actual story is that phrase being interpreted in various different ways by the characters.
That's a good hint, because we don't want to spoil too much about that one. But it is sort of it's striking that it's not a pun, because you're very good at pun titles. But it's also, it seems to be, without spoiling it, it's an inflection point in the series. And once you were writing that novella, was the third arc very kind of clear in your mind at that point? Did you see what was going to happen next?
Yes. By the time we get to the end of Overview Effect, I think there's a very clear path towards where the final set of stories is going to go. It's a destination I've had in mind for a while, but also, like I said, it's about that sense of wanting to give a complete story. And so by the time you get to the end of Overview Effect, There's a lot of answering questions and doing getting rid of the sort of long-hanging mysteries that have never really been at the forefront of the series, because the thing at the forefront has always been the planet of the week. But the questions that might have been eating away at the back of your mind, we answer a lot of those in this story.
You mentioned in an email a little while back that kind of as an indie, your promotional model is sort of relies on people having sort of these long timetables, and that the episodic release allows, it sort of helps with that that there's a sort of slow burn marketing. And I wonder, like, is marketing these books something you think a lot about and maybe lose a lot of sleep over, and sort of, yeah, like, what's been your experience of getting these books out in front of people?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a challenge because it's being independently published. So the main marketing drive is just me shouting on social media and hoping other people pick it up. But I think from the very beginning, Fermi was first and foremost the sort of stories I wanted to be telling. I wanted to be telling big, high concept, planet of the week type stories. But also, it was pretty much designed to be independently published. It has a recurring cast of heroes who commit a genocide every week. So not many traditional publishers are going to pick up that premise. It is something that comes out piece by piece, which means there's always a new little bit of content coming. So there's always something new to say, which means that it's easier to create that long tail and to promote over the long term rather than having to do a big wide blast before everything you have to say starts to get a bit stale. So it's one of those cases where the story that I really want to tell and the way that I'm selling the story have fitted together neatly enough to allow me to do what I want to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And Scarlet Ferret, who sell the Fermi books with extras, with these kind of extra kind of bonus materials, that also seems to me to be a really good fit for what you're doing here.
Absolutely, it's a great model because, and frankly, we all want to get further away from Amazon at the moment, and that only becomes more so as time goes on. And it is the thing that I most love about it is that when you buy a book from there, you don't get an account. You don't have to fill in all your personal information. You just send them the money. They send you a link to download the product, and that's the total extent of your interaction with them, which I love. And crafting the extras for it is a lot of fun. For I think it was For the Trees, the extra with that was just a short list of Elizabeth Gordon talking about her favourite books, which, is an interesting selection. But this month, for Graveyard Orbit, we've done a collaboration with X-Stasis Games, where they're bringing out a new game called Disposable Bags of Meat that is very much a sort of horror movie sort of game where rather than playing a character who has loads of skills and tools, your stats are grit and luck, and you're basically just trying to get by on luck and determination, which fits the Fermi characters very well. So I've written a scenario for that game where you are playing the Fermi crew on a mysterious alien planet and trying to survive the planet.
Oh, okay. And so that's, and so you get the extra is the add-on, or the extra is the game? How does it work?
The extra is the add-on.
Okay.
So it will tell you that it will have these sort of stats for the monsters, and it will tell you the scenario. So basically, it's a way to point Fermi readers to Disposable Bags of Meat, which is a game that Fermi readers will enjoy, and hopefully Disposable Bags of Meat players will also want to check out Fermi and have a great time both ways.
I mean, on social media, you talk. On social media, you talk fairly often about games and about kind of maybe not all the time, and you've written about games. Are you playing a lot at the moment, or are you playing? And what are you playing?
Are we talking tabletop?
I guess tabletop or other, or just games generally. I think you've written for Rock Paper Shotgun, and I feel like occasionally I've seen you kind of talk about video games that you're excited about on social media. I wonder if you have time for either tabletop or kind of computer games.
Yeah, tabletop. I've got a couple of groups. I've got a Pathfinder group that we're playing a sort of long campaign with, and I've got another group we're playing Roanoke and Deckard's Heart game, which is sort of really sort of grimdark dungeon crawling fun. In video games, I am a sucker for No Man's Sky. I spent so much time just building nice little bases in No Man's Sky. I've been playing Atomfall because it's a video game set in the Lake District. You've got to have to on that. And there's another game that I've been playing recently as research for another project that I'm just going to slip past because that's all not ready to be talked about yet.
Super secret.
Indeed.
Okay. But you've been playing a game for a super secret project, which is enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just reset my brain. You've just going back to the marketing briefly. What has helped the most? Like what kind of things have you seen leading to sales, or leading to kind of like spikes or peaks in sales, or is it kind of hard to tell? Is it kind of that everything just sort of mixes together, and you don't always know exactly where things are coming from?
It is really hard to tell a lot of the time because the sales often do not line up with the actual promotional efforts at all. And it is by design that there's a long tail and people will be picking it up at different times. But it does mean that often you will be doing a big promotional push for the latest book, and the byproduct of that is seeing a spike in sales for the first one, Dyson Sphere. But often the main thing is to try and find other people who will talk about it, because you can never be the best advocate for your own work. So often the biggest results I've had have been from when other writers I've known who have read the Fermi stories have lent their praise to it and have said good things about it online. That has often led to big spikes. So it's always good to get your work read by people you respect, because it turns out other people listen to them.
Yeah, right. It makes a lot of sense. Ken MacLeod in particular, you had an interesting situation where I forget how it happened exactly, but you were both sort of you realized that maybe something in his book was chiming with something in yours, and then you kind of exchanged. But Beyond the Hallowed Sky, right? I think it's Beyond the Hallowed Sky.
I actually sent him Fermi's Progress before Beyond the Hallowed Sky had been announced. He was still finishing it up when I sent it to him. And yeah, it was only afterwards that I discovered that he had a mysterious alien entity in his book called The Fermi, and that a lot of the story centered around an alien planet that happened to have bees on it, while the third book in the Fermi series is called Planet of the Apiaries and is about a planet with bees on it. So that was a weird coincidence.
And his drive isn't it also like a bubble of sorts? Yeah.
Yes, it's about a prototype FTL drive that is based on the Alcubierre theory. So yeah, it was a weird bit of synchronicity.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and yeah. What advice would you give to writers looking to go out on their own as you have with this sort of indie approach? Is there anything you wish you'd known earlier?
I think the main thing is to realize that publishing is a job. There's a reason why publishers are companies where they have a whole bunch of different people working to do all the different jobs. One person doing that is hard and is going to limit how much you can do. So you need to almost divorce yourself from the writing part of the job and be able to think about the logistics and the design and the marketing of it. If you can, it is worth spending money on the important elements of it. I think a huge part of why the Fermi has done as well as it has is James Cooper's just brilliant cover illustrations. And he has, brought the Fermi to life. He's done a fantastic set of illustrations of the ship, both from the front and the side, and really just made it into a real visual thing. He was able to do those fantastic exploding planet backdrops for each of the covers. And I think that's made a huge difference to selling the Fermi, I think. So, I don't need to say this here, but obviously still well clear of all the AI slop out there, because that stuff does make your book look cheap and amateurish, and it is going to reflect badly on the stuff that's in there.
Yeah. Whereas, as you say, the art on the Fermi books really does sort of it does reflect so well on you do such a good job of visualizing this ship in kind of there's a line in one of them. I'm gonna just. I hope it's okay to just read this one now. Approaching a brand new world like a deadline. I mean, like all of these sort of there are these lovely kind of moments all the way through, and also sort of like really sort of beautifully written moments of awful destruction, which I'm often sort of struck by. You're very good at writing this sort of the horrific consequences of this ship. And yeah, you do need to have good covers with that. Just helps hugely.
Thanks. And I think there's two comments that I think always come back to me when it comes to trying to find the tone for Fermi stories. One of them is, and I've not got this written down in front of me, so this is going to be poor paraphrasing, but Terry Pratchett once said something along the lines of, it's funny to watch someone fall down a manhole, but sometimes you have to look down the manhole. And the other thing is, in the first Austin Powers movie, they have this recurring joke of Austin Powers murdering some henchman and quipping as he does it, and then cutting to that henchman's family receiving the news and just being absolutely destroyed by it. And those two things are always sort of somewhere in my mind when I'm writing Fermi, because you are constantly just causing huge amounts of death and destruction in every story. And it is important to, wherever you can, make that feel real, make sure that people are actually feeling those stakes, and that wiping out an entire planet doesn't just feel like a cheap throwaway gag. That, the crew and the readers actually get just how terrible the Fermi actually is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Pratchett there, and I had written down here. You've said before in an interview that anyone who's read anything you've written will see Pratchett's grubby fingerprints all over it,
Yes.
and I wonder which other writers do you feel have had a kind of big influence on your writing, and which writers do you find yourself returning to most often?
Let's think. I mean, obviously, if you're going to talk about Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams is obviously another influence on my story about space travelers who have left a destroyed Earth and have a quite emotional, super intelligent robot on their crew. There might be an influence there. It's not for me to say. I love sort of a lot of Soviet science fiction. And Stanislav Lem is brilliant with stuff like not just the things like The Invincible, but which is very much a sort of model for Fermi in terms of a story where the alien planet is the star, and the story is driven by figuring out just what the deal is here. But also the Star Diaries, which is very much that sort of episodic comic storytelling that really feels like someone doing Douglas Adams before Douglas Adams did, in terms of using sci-fi to just really revel in absurdity.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Star Diaries, and you I think you were talking to Womble to run along the shelves, and I think you mentioned Roadside Picnic. Is that the one, the one of the recommendations you had?
Yes, I love Roadside Picnic. Yeah, no, Roadside Picnic is one I absolutely adore. Just in terms of the story, and also in terms of just tracing the, like, given that it's not actually that well known a book outside of sci-fi circles, it has had such a weird cultural footprint in terms of how it relates to Chernobyl and the way before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was an article about tour guides taking people through the sort of Chernobyl area, and they refer to themselves as stalkers from the sort of scavengers that go into the zone in the book.
That's amazing.
But also, in the article, it was talking about how they will actually go in and arrange sort of little displays of abandoned toys and things, just to kind of create that sort of spooky environmental storytelling that you would find while, exploring an area like that in a video game or something. And so it's weird. Yeah, because obviously Chernobyl, Roadside Picnic influenced the Roadside Picnic was adapted into the movie Stalker, and was also adapted into the video game Stalker series, which is set in the grounds of Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of weird back and forth between the story and the influence of the story, so that you can't actually read Roadside Picnic today without really thinking about Chernobyl, even though it was written long before the accident happened.
Right. And you mentioned Atomfall before. I mean, is there, talking about kind of landscapes that have been sort of that are kind of seen through different, through a different lens, is Atomfall kind of very much in that mode? And do you kind of get those vibes from it as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. Atomfall is completely sort of Stalker, but set in the Lake District, and that's one of the things I love about it. And also, like Stalker, Atomfall is based on a real nuclear disaster. It was based on Windscale fire in 1957 that happened in that region.
Okay. You've said before that you don't think people can write science fiction without being an optimist on some level. And in that same interview, you talked about how a lot of the power structures in place in the world are controlled by people who don't believe most other people are really real, which is a lovely way to put it. And you also noticed that in the face of disaster, humans are more likely to collaborate than try to screw each other over. And that you thought there was hope for the human race. And that was back in 2021.
How's that going? So are you asking how that's going after the last 5?
Well, yeah. I mean, what is giving you the most hope here in 2025? And yeah, I mean, I wrote that out and I was thinking, what do I write? What do I say next? But you've done it for me. So thank you.
Yeah.
It was very eloquently put.
I think that after a certain point, and I think we're past that point by a long way, optimism is less a belief than a decision. I think you have to decide to see the world as a place where things can be achieved, where things can be made better. And as grim as things are and continue to get, I still can't see a good case for making the other decision. But that is a lot of what drives writing for me, is the characters lose constantly. Every victory they get is Pyrrhic in one way or another. And a lot of writing for me, including, the stuff that I'm writing now, is about finding ways for the characters to justify keeping going and trying to do anything in the face of forces that they have no hope of influencing.
Yeah. You made me think of this Václav Havel quote, which you might know, I think it gets shared around quite a lot. That sort of let me just not misquote it now. Where is it? Hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism, and kind of the idea of kind of hope being an orientation of the spirit, I think is how he put it. And yeah, I think there's, think it's we are living at a moment where there is this where we constantly failing at things, or constantly seeing things fail, and you have to. There is that conviction. There's the other quote I think I saw first in an interview. Who was it? I forget who it was now. There was an interview where the phrase "hope is a discipline" came up, and I think that's also something which kind of chimes with what you were saying there.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. You don't hope because you even think it's likely that things are going to get better. You hope because what's the alternative, really?
Right. Exactly. Let me see. Your Fermi novellas are available from indie bookshop Scarlet Ferret, and the Fermi books and your Star Trek Lower Decks book, the excellent Lower Decks book, are also available from all good bookshops, including the one that we don't name, but we'll say it's on Amazon, and I think Amazon also has your you can buy like a print edition of the Fermi season 1. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, there's a paperback edition of Fermi's Progress, and eventually there will be a paperback of Fermi's Wake.
Mm-hmm.
But Scarlet Ferret remains the best place to get the ebooks and all the extras that come with that.
Yeah, Scarlet Ferret. We'll just keep saying Scarlet Ferret, and see. Dude. I mean, and also just from the Kevin who runs Scarlet Ferret is championing all the good things about kind of indie publishing, DRM free ebooks, no AI, really kind of standing up for all the things that are important. So yeah, do support Scarlet Ferret and get your Chris Farnell books there, not somewhere else.
Absolutely.
I think that's everything. Just sort of last up, I suppose. What's up? What's up next? There's obviously the next Fermi novella, and you're working on the next Fermi season, and you've hinted that there might be something else. Yeah, is there anything else you want to sort of mention briefly before we go?
I think at the moment the things that I can talk about are the next Fermi's Wake novella, Overview Effect. And depending on when you're listening to this, it may or may not be news that Overview Effect is going to be in the Choose Your Own Path adventure book format. So you are actually going to be making the Fermi crew's decisions for them, which is unfortunate for them.
Unfortunate for and then writing that kind of book must have presented its own kinds of challenges as well, branching things and juggling all of those things.
Writing for me usually involves quite a few spreadsheets, and for Overview Effect, so many more spreadsheets, just like you wouldn't believe.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been great being here.
You've been listening to Interzone Pod with me, Gareth Jelley, and my guest today, Chris Farnell. Find out more about Interzone at interzone.press and read stories for free at interzone.digital. Thanks for listening. See you next time.